Can you guys move closer together a little bit? There. There, I can see you. Yes, perfect. Okay. Oh, what happened? It's not posting to Facebook. 1 second. Okay. It's not posting to Facebook, so let me just fix something here. I'm going to just get technical. I'm going to do a live right from Facebook. One second. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no.
For some reason, it dropped my Facebook connection. I'm just going to make a little announcement there for people to check us on YouTube. Hello and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Yvonne here from My Halal Kitchen. I just want to let you guys all know that the interview that I'm planning this morning on the book Halal Food, A History is going to be live on my YouTube channel at My Halal Kitchen. We're having a little bit of difficulty getting it to post to this page. So if you can join us over there, that's great. We can take your questions and we'll be on for about 30 to 40 minutes. So check it out, myhalalkitchen.com, youtube.com/myhalalkitchen. So unless I get this technical issue worked out, you can just follow us on the YouTube channel and it's going to be streaming live. Okay, see you over there. Okay, let me try one more thing. It's just, for some reason, will not. I have to re-add it. I don't know why it's doing that. Oh, she said, I hear you fine. Oh. Oh, shoot. Okay. She said it worked. All right. I guess it's just telling me that it's not, but it was working. Okay. Oh, great. You can see us fine. Oh, thank you, guys. For some reason, my StreamYard was telling me that Facebook couldn't connect. So thank you all for letting me know. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I'm so excited to have this interview this morning with Drs. Phoebe Armanios and Boğaç Ergene, the authors of the book Halal Food, A History. This is something I've been wanting to do for a very long time. Welcome, merhaba. Thank you so much for joining us from Turkey.
Merhaba.
Hi, merhaba.
This is a really exciting time because I don't know if you guys, I've been posting about this book, Halal Food, A History, and we finally get to meet the authors and you can ask them their questions, but I have some questions I'm going to go into to dig into their research on this fascinating topic. And the topic of our page is My Halal Kitchen, so everything halal food, and they are the experts on this history. So let me just give you guys a background of their work and what brought them to write this fantastic book. And for those of you who are looking for the book, I posted it yesterday where you can get a link to order the book. So I'll post that again in the middle of our conversation. But for anybody who wants to look up the book now, you can just go to a previous post from yesterday and find the link. So today we have Dr. Phoebe Armanios and Boğaç Ergene. Phoebe Armanios is a professor of history at Middlebury College in Vermont, where she is also co-director of the Axon Center for the Humanities. Her research focuses on comparative religious practices between Christians and Muslims and among Christian communities in Egypt, as well as throughout the Middle East and the Balkans. She's a former Fulbright scholar who has authored or co-authored two books, including Coptic Christianity in Ottoman Egypt, as well as several articles, chapters, and blog entries. In her writings, she looks at everything from the veneration of saints and pilgrimages to diverse food and fasting traditions, comparative gender roles, and recently at the history of Christian television in the modern Middle East. That's interesting. Dr. Boğaç Ergene is professor of history at the University of Vermont. He's the author and co-author of 3 books, including Local Court, Provincial Society, and Justice in the Ottoman Empire, and The Economics of Ottoman Justice. He also edited or co-edited 2 books, including Judicial Practice, Institutions and Agents in the Islamic World. He's published multiple articles in major history, law, and economic history journals. His research over the past 2 decades has focused on Islamic law and legal practice in the Ottoman Empire, a topic which he has explored both qualitatively and quantitatively. He is currently working on a book project that explores perceptions of corruption in the Ottoman context. Wow. We have some special guests today. Thank you so much for being here and for offering to answer all my questions about your research. So,
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be with you, Yvonne.
Thanks for having us. It's indeed a pleasure.
And I think we're getting comments that people are, saying this is an impressive topic. So, just your work is so respected, and just can't wait to hear more. So, let me ask you the first question. On, when I first saw the topic of your book, I just immediately I thought, what intrigued you to write this book? What led to thinking about the fact that this topic was necessary to be written, and did you have any challenges to to have the book even published at all? Was there any resistance to is this necessary, or was it sort of a timely thing that what were the reasons that led to publishing the book, writing and publishing the book?
I'll start and maybe Boğaç can jump in. So I have always been interested in food studies and food history. And as you mentioned, the comparisons between Muslim and religious practices are at the heart of my research and my, professional training as a scholar. And then about 6-7 years ago, I started thinking that I wanted to teach about the Middle East. I teach at a small college in Vermont, and I wanted to teach about life in the Middle East from a perspective that my students can really understand and grasp. And I thought food and food history is something that maybe they can really relate to. These were, of course, the years, after 9/11, and where a lot of really heavy-duty political topics were being covered in our classes. And students really, I don't think we're learning a lot about the culture and the day-to-day life of peoples in the Middle East. So I came up with a class on food history in the Middle East, which I still teach and love and have updated over the years. And about halfway through teaching that class, a couple of years into it, I was actually approached by an editor at Oxford University's Press. So this is to answer your question about the interest. There had been an interest academically in having a work out there that tries to represent the topic in, a more accessible way, a more historical way, and so this opportunity came, and then I approached Boğaç, and maybe he can chime in about how he kind of came into the project.
Oh, right.
So Phoebe is the star of the project because she was approached by the publisher, and it's her topic. It's food history or food studies is not something that I worked on in the past, but I'm a legal historian. So I work on law, I work on legal change, I work on Islamic law in particular. And what made the topic interesting for me is to approach it as a topic of law, right? Food regulations, food purity, essentially, and do Islamic legal texts say about that, and whether or not there have been changes in that or interpretations, different interpretations. So when Phoebe mentioned, this invitation that she received from the publisher, this idea of collaboration, something that we are excited to do, came up, and we jumped on it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, sorry, Yvonne, the publisher asked, do you want to write something about food in the Middle East in general? And when we discussed it, we thought, no, we really want to write something about halal food. That's what's really missing in the literature.
Yes.
Noticed a big gap that scholars, and it's not that scholars weren't writing about it, but in this kind of holistic, broader way that we wanted to approach it. And so we came back to them with a proposal for the book.
That covers every aspect of it. Its history, its modern day connotations, so many different topics associated with halal food. That was the vision. That's the vision.
And you were spot on about that, because, I've only ever seen before where halal food is just sort of touched upon. It's not, there might be one chapter dedicated to it somewhere, but you guys look at this, the entire book is dedicated to this history of this fantastic, aspect of halal. So I'm just, I'm not even done. I haven't finished the book. I mean, I've gone through lots and lots of it and highlighted, but there's so much in here. And I'm fascinated by the beginning, especially because I didn't know so much about, I mean, I knew, of course, why halal was started and all of that, but I think most people kind of miss the history between the very, very beginning up until now. And you really cover that middle part, which is full of really important, pertinent, information for us about how things have developed over centuries. So, and we can get to that in a minute, but because it spans such a vast amount of time, what was your most interesting findings? What were your, individually or collectively, what were your most interesting findings out of all the research that you've done?
So one thing that has been interesting, that still is interesting for us, is that, halal, the notion itself, and specifically its application to food, including the beverages, has been a topic of interest among Muslims. This is a topic that has occupied the minds of Muslims historically, from the very beginning until now, essentially. So that continuous fascination itself is really, really interesting. It says so much about the meaning of food, right?
Yes.
It is one of the basic, aspects of identity,
yes.
relationship to community, culture, essentially. And Muslims attempt to define it, right? Make it suitable to what they consider to be appropriate, right? Pure, clean, right? And that continuous interest in food and its meaning is something that was a revelation for us. Also, how those interpretations varied over time, right? Temporally and also geographically. So that is something that needs to be emphasized. People do acknowledge that, scholars who have worked on this issue. But the ways in which those variations happened in the past do not get covered as much. Right?
Exactly.
When you look at all those, the pieces that you mentioned, one chapter, halal is a set of regulations, this do's and don'ts essentially. But the interest, the enthusiasm, the excitement in the ways in which Muslims looked at those and thought about those and varied and changed those over time, although they are very much based in the scripture itself, is interesting, fascinating. It's a complex story that needs to be told in a straightforward manner, in a manner that's understandable to the wider public. That's what we told.
Yeah, it seems like the passion has never died, right? Yeah, exactly. That's a really good point. And I would just add something really brief on Boğaç's point here, which is I was really impressed by the dynamism embedded in shaping halal up till the present, especially. I was often in charge of some of the research, especially for the modern period, on halal cuisine, on halal dining, on the halal marketplace and products. And I was just so intrigued by the diverse voices that are emerging in the conversation about halal and determining halal. And I mean, and yes, that can cause some disagreements and tensions and so on. But I do appreciate just the plurality and people like yourself, for example, being part of that conversation was something we were drawn to talking about in the book, and I think we're going to get to talking more about that later. But for me, that's a really important point to hammer home at the end is this just dynamism and ongoing conversation.
Right. And when we had talked previously, I thought it was interesting how when you mentioned halal cuisine, and I had said to you, I have never, when I read that part of your book, I really felt like you guys really just grasped this history so well that I felt like I was reading an autobiography of my own journey in this industry. Like you just got it. And I'm reading it and I'm going, how did they, just nailed it. You nailed the intention, the meaning of halal cuisine. Because I had often gotten questioned a lot, like, what is halal cuisine? Why would you need to create, something like that? It is what it is. Or, I was coming from such a diverse background and wanting to make things halal, but you really understood the why. And that part I just appreciated so much because it just you even included a recipe. You even included my my recipe for I'm going to go back here because the coq au vin, coke without the vin. It's on page 223, and I want to ask you why you did that because it, and why you chose that particular one, because you did a great explanation of my why for me. I felt, something that has been harder for me to articulate by, I'm just putting out the recipes, putting out the cookbook, but you seem to really nail the why there. So,
So can I just say,
sure,
I was
sure.
so glad that your book was well timed with our research because my halal kitchen came out as we were producing this scholarship, and I was just thrilled to be able to buy it and look at it and read it and kind of engage with it in the book. I'll start with the first question, which was why the Coke without the vin. I mean, that was such a really nice nod of you to Julia Child, right? To her recipe, to a kind of a recipe that became iconic in the repertoire of French cookery and the way people think of Julia Child's contribution to the French American repertoire of food. And so I thought that really exemplified, and the title was very playful too. I just thought it was very interesting. So it was really good example of what we were talking about. But your point on halal cuisine, that chapter was a bit challenging to write, partly because, as you were suggesting, the term halal cuisine was being used by certain foodies and people in the industry and so on, but it wasn't well defined. I think you and couple other people might have been the few to really take a stab at defining it. And ever since we talked recently with you a few weeks back, I've been thinking that even my own thoughts about halal cuisine have evolved since I've written the book, in the sense that maybe I should have said this more directly. I think we implied it, but I think what makes halal cuisine is the challenge of having to cook food with a list of ingredients that are excluded. So oftentimes cuisines are about technique, and if the French saute or have a béarnaise sauce, or this as a chef. But so a lot of people are dismissing, well, what is halal cuisine if you're not offering a technique? Well, for me, actually, I've been thinking about this over the last few weeks, and the technique is the challenge of cooking something, knowing that you can't use white wine, but that using grape vinegar would give the similar acidity, would give a similar depth to the recipe, with an innovation to the recipe. So, I mean, I'll let you come in here, Yvonne, because that's your territory. But
well, I just think, again, you just nailed it. Things that are sometimes harder for us who are, in it, to articulate, and that dismissiveness you talked about of halal cuisine is so on point, because that's what I experienced a lot, was just, the why, even among people in our own community who might think, well, halal is halal. Like, you don't, why do things have to be labeled halal? But coming from this American experience, it's a totally different perception. And, it's that wanting to create the coca van, I come from an Italian background, you wanting to bring those recipes in, but making them halal. It seems simple enough, but oftentimes these things would get dismissed. And you're also on point about that technique. Maybe there isn't that technique of certain sauces and sautés, but there is a science to making sure those substitutes are, they're not just thrown together. They're well tested. They're, these things happen over and over and over, like a science lab, to get those tastes right, so that cuisine can be respected and elevated, and it is considered. And I think in years to come that these things will change because of work like yours, who, is taking a look inside of this world of cuisine. It really is. It is an area in its own right. So I'm hopeful. But it was very exciting to read that, because again, you were just, putting a spotlight on it and really grasping what those of us in the industry have been working on for so long. So that brings me to my next question, which is, you covered so many players and pioneers in this global halal industry, from Malaysia to Turkey to the US. And how did you find all these people? I mean, I'm recognizing people that I know and people that I've worked with, and I'm just fascinated that your research does such a good job of covering all these people who are making waves in, marketplace, product innovation, chefs, and so on. So how did you find everybody? And
that's a great question. A question we haven't thought about before until we posed it. But I guess, one thing that struck us from the very beginning is that, and something that we had not known until the point that we started research, that this is big business now, halal
yes.
food. And big business, as a big business, there's a big, essentially, picture out there that needs to be grasped.
Right.
So in order to grasp that, you have to identify, major players, right? Or the players that we consider to be major, so that, we can draw that picture, depict that picture, portray that picture as accurately as possible. So understanding the game that's being played there, and I'm not using the term game in a negative sense, understanding the relationships that's being displayed out there, especially in the modern period, required us to do a little bit of research, the kind of research Phoebe and I are not used to, essentially. That's the political economy of halal to some extent.
Sure.
Going through all these documents out there, these are state documents, going through newspaper articles, going through scholarly works out there. We did a lot of reading. We did try to connect all these scattered points and characterizations out there. And we were lucky enough to come up with this relatively what we consider to be a coherent picture of the game, essentially. You have to understand the nature of that business that requires major, identifying major players, states, how they're involved, the kind of competition that's going on among them, essentially, the institutions that they set up. But the trick was to try to represent what's going on as accurately, as comprehensively as possible. You can't do that without identifying correctly the major players there.
Right, and you've done that so well. And that said, is this book being taught in universities? Is it being used in universities? And if so, what kind of subjects is it included in?
So I've already assigned it in my food history class, because I was inspired by my students to write this book in many ways. And
wow.
But I have colleagues who have told us they're gonna teach it in the classes on actually Islam and science, because there's a lot about manufacturing and technology and changes that affect food consumption habits and food ethics and so on. I think I've seen it being taught in some intro to Islamic religion classes. Some people think, like I did, food is a good gateway to discuss certain elements of Islamic religious practice.
Absolutely.
But hopefully with the paperback just being out a few months ago, more professors will assign it. Yes,
that's exactly. It's, and I'm thinking even people, chefs, culinary schools, it's also, because when you understand a history, you understand a people. And I think, Phoebe, you and I have this in common where we both love books on food history, and we like to dig into that. And I think that makes you understand, why food is prepared certain ways, why flavors are included, all of that. I think that anybody who's interested in food or food history, and I know more and more people are interested in cooking halal, even if they're not ascribing to halal, because of the marketplace that's being opened up for job opportunities and in halal restaurants around the world, and so on and so forth. So it's a gateway. It's a gateway. Someone is saying I bought it through Google Books. Oh, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get to more of your questions. So please keep bringing in your questions. So at the very end of our conversation, we're going to address everyone's questions. So my next question is about the food outlets, the halal food outlets, and those kind of networks that are out there globally. Were you surprised by this sort of explosion of growth? I mean, and I think halal food outlets have always been there, but it just seems like every other day I get Google alerts on halal food and cooking, and every other day I'm getting things that pop up in Taiwan, Indonesia, Japan, lots in Southeast Asia, but also lots more in the US. It just seems like it's happening more and more. And I'm just wondering, in your research, were you pretty surprised by the vast amount of things like restaurants and other kind of halal outlets?
I would say yes and no. I mean, we live usually in the northeastern part of the United States and had often traveled to cosmopolitan areas like Montreal and New York City and a little bit Boston and Chicago and so on. We had been watching the evolution or the progression of seeing halal food outlets rise up and become more apparent. I would say over the last tangentially. Having said that, it does seem at times to have really grown at a pace maybe we never imagined it to be in. And to be honest, each of us was raised in a Middle Eastern country, me in Egypt and Boğaç in Turkey. And so, where everything or just about everything presumably is halal. So the idea of like a halal outlet it's kind of taken for granted. You don't think about that when you're in an Islamic world context, but it's the issue of a growing diaspora, a growing creative diaspora of foodies, of restaurateurs, of people who are doing, anything related to food marketing or restaurant businesses. And that's starting to be more appreciated and needed in places that are non-Muslim majority settings.
Right. So it coincides with the diaspora, basically.
Precisely. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if you are familiar with the 19th and 20th century history of Muslims, globally speaking, at least vaguely, this halal food and its connection to Islamic identity, Muslim identity, especially in Western settings, is so very close, unrelated. As you watch, for example, what's going on among Muslim communities, places like Germany, for example, or France, and their struggles to express their identity, their ways of expressing those identity, essentially. You can understand why that proliferation is taking place. It is by choosing to eat a certain way, they are expressing a desire, kind of, and making that public specifically. So it's not necessarily surprising to us that this is happening, but making that connection itself, which wasn't apparent to us at the point, when we started. It came to us, of course, that makes sense, right? Why didn't we think about that before?
Right.
So that was the revelation.
You have some photos in your book about like a doner kebab shop in Hamburg, Germany. There's a halal restaurant in Tokyo, Japan. That one surprised me. Japan is growing in its halal outlets. So yeah, that's a really exciting. It's exciting to see. I think most of us kind of know it, but to have it really spelled out and is proof that these things are happening. And also the convenient foods you mentioned, like haludis in the UK and this halal on demand. That surprised me even, because sometimes things happen so fast it's hard for me to even catch up with what's going on. So you really grasped that.
Yeah, and I would imagine since the book first came out in 2018, I'm sure in the last 2 years there have been some
So much
innovation.
more. Yeah.
Especially, I think in terms, you would maybe know more, but in terms of apps that are helping shoppers identify,
Yes. Yes.
items that I think that was a new frontier. So
Definitely. And when I first started, 12 years ago, it's like we all wanted to do everything at once because we could, if you were in the industry, you could see all of the things that were lacking, just by way of, being raised in this country, being American and saying, I want the same things that are out there, but in the halal way. And so it was pretty cool to for app developers and website developers to work with chefs. And it's been a really interesting kind of, and very quick, period of innovation. So I think we all kind of realize we have to move on this fast because people want this stuff. They want the halal on demand, basically. They want that, the fast food, the quick searches on your phone to see if something is halal and all of that. So people have moved pretty fast. And yeah, I'm sure now you could probably do another update in a couple of years because things are constantly moving, and it's exciting. It's exciting because you can't say that about all types of food. But I'll say we'll get to your question. So certification agencies, that is something that I don't always talk with my audience about. We don't always get to that aspect of a type of conversation because it's very complicated. Number one, these vast certification agencies throughout the world, and let alone just in the US, there's so many different ones, and people get pretty confused about it, about their who does what and what are their standards and so on and so forth. And I found it interesting that you sort of highlighted the Malaysian standards, and that seems to be I can understand why, but could you explain to everybody what your findings were in terms of why Malaysia, why did it stand out to you, and differences you saw?
So Malaysia is really interesting, and there are certain scholars who call Malaysia among the trendsetters in halal business, in the sense that there has been a determination in the Malaysian government to be a trendsetter, a standard setter, and identify with halal business. And that has everything to do with the country's desire to be, first of all, a pioneer in the modernization process, but at the same time couple this with its Islamic aspirations, essentially. So it's a form of Islamic modernity. On one hand, this is a government that wants to identify Islamic credentials, but at the same time, technologically and scientifically and in other aspects of modernization, be in fact an advanced society. So one way to kind of make itself more visible is to emphasize its ability to define modern halal in terms of what it means in food area. That means coming up with a modern standard that's on one hand, capable of satisfying all these religious aspirations, religious requirements, but at the same time, it's compatible to the standards associated with the modern food industry, essentially.
Right.
Right. Malaysia is one country that has done that consistently, and it's one of the important trendsetters that came up with halal food standards. That's a coherent code, right? If you want to call a food item, a beverage halal, you have to satisfy all these standards, and that are not only religious in terms of their nature, but also bureaucratic, but also in healthy and hygienic in a way. So this has been going on since 1970s. There are all these attempts on the part of Malaysian government to generate all these codes and requirements and regulations, essentially, and that aspirations and attempts have been rewarded outside of Malaysia by Muslim communities elsewhere, and recognize those standards as these are good, right? We are going to kind of abide by them. We are going to adopt them, and we are going to, in fact, recognize them as legitimate. So if there's a Malaysian halal kind of label on a food item, we will consider this halal. We are not going to question this. So this historical, dominance of this particular actor agent in the halal business is something that we recognize early in our research, and that's the reason that we put emphasis on, Malaysian standards. It's one of the most recognized actually standards out there in the industry.
Right, and the key word you mentioned is consistently.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that is the thing that that is the gold standard for the thing that we see, like we wish a lot of others would aspire to. So that leads perfectly into my next question regarding halal and tayyib. This, I am so happy that you included this in your book, because this is something that very quickly after I started my website, I'd always thought about organic, and my idea of halal is the best, the most natural, the purest. But because I've never been a junk food person, I've never been a person who's into like synthetic products and all of that. So I had a little bit of a conflict when I would see products certified halal, and I would say, but they're not really all that healthy, or I would say, scratch those things and just go natural, and make sure that it's also easier to cook that way. So that was sort of how I navigated this idea of tayyib, or pure, wholesome. But it's been difficult to articulate in many ways, because I think people have enough of dealing with halal in general, especially when you're in a country or places where halal is not the majority. You're busy enough trying to read ingredients and figure out, is this halal, is this not, and even halal meat places or restaurants, are they really halal, and all of that stuff. There's enough on people's plates, I think, but you really addressed this idea of tayyib really well, and I just want to read some part of your book to everybody, because I think it's a good reminder, and then I let you kind of expand on it. But you go in, you talk about Greeks and Romans, and how in Mediterranean civilizations have always had this interest in good food, and I wish we could have a whole nother interview on just that historical aspect, because leading up to what we know as halal today. But here you say, and I'm on page 191 for anybody who wants to read this later. But you say, compared to other Abrahamic traditions, however, it is possible to argue that the Islamic scripture makes the most emphatic case for eating good food, and for linking that mandate to the religion's dietary rules. The Quran gives the imperative to eat, kullu, 28 times. Terms associated with the root of this word, and then parentheses akl, appear 108 times, and they are often linked to al-tayyibat, or the good things. So I really love that you get into that, because halal and tayyib is something I can see even in the industry, people wanting to go forward with, and realizing that we need to get back to that pure and natural way to really truly be that standard of halal that we want to see. So could you sort of on that?
That chapter was a revelation. That's another revelation.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun to research, because it involved spending a lot of time looking at the medieval Islamic writings that use the word tayyib, and trying to really grasp how they defined it. And we do have a section that follows the part you read, where we say, well, they all kind of defined it differently and ambiguously. I mean, and there was an interesting circularity, where really the literature kept returning to the fact that halal is tayyib and tayyib is halal. That's how you define it. And tayyib, of course, can mean wholesome, can mean good, can mean tasty, can mean delicious, fragrant, right? It has these really fascinating lexicological variations that are so, and I think that and Arabic is such a rich language, where one word can have a plurality of meanings. But
exactly.
I think that plurality has served modern believers well in thinking about how they might want to define it for themselves and for the particular way in which they would like to advocate for a cause in terms of food. And I think you saw in that chapter, we talk about two major strands really in Tayyib. I mean, there's the ethical strand, and then there's the healthful strand, which I think you alluded to in your own experience. And the ethical crowd is very diverse. They're also not coherent or unified, but they range from Muslim believers, especially in the diaspora, who believe that if you're going to consume meat, that it ought to be, animals ought to be treated in a humane way during life, and in death too during slaughter, and that they, that they ought to be free range, and organic gets tied into that as well. Also, to a group that says, well, if you're really going to eat tayyib, then you should probably eat less meat, or even think about adopting a vegetarian or even vegan lifestyle. And in the book we give all the explanations that they offer from scriptures and from Islamic traditions for why they believe that that's a good thing to do, a tayyib thing to do, right?
Right. You go into ethical halal right after halal and tayyib, and it's perfect segue. Yeah,
exactly. And then you have the healthful crowd, who, kind of like you are saying, they're suggesting that, well, just because something is technically alcohol free of any pig residue, or was slaughtered appropriately and so on, doesn't necessarily mean it's perfectly good for you, whatever it is you're eating. Or if it has all these chemicals in it that are technically halal, should you be eating really a product with these chemicals in it? And so they are advocating for, and I think organic overlaps with both, again, for non-GMO, organic food culture, being aware of high sugar, high salt, food that can cause you illness, right? So and on that level, actually, it almost rings of the medieval Islamic medical tradition of being aware that food that you put in your body does play a role in the way you are going to live. And then we have you actually came up with a criticism, which was raised by several people, that all of these injunctions that people are debating now in terms of tayyib, they add an extra burden on the Muslim. Would you want to chime in on that? Because that's a really good point.
I mean, this is such a complicated discussion. On one level, tayyib is what you make of it.
Yes.
How you define a food. And that's a wonderful ambiguity, an ambiguity that's pregnant with innovation, the possibility of innovation, right? That makes halal such a timeless notion. Halal is tayyib, and tayyib is what you consider to be good. And since the notion of good, to some extent, changes over time, that gives your ability, an ability to be agent of what you're eating, in addition to everything that you get from the scripture. You can intervene and define what's good within limits, of course. And that empowers you, right? At the same time, the counter-argument is that all these extra considerations, first of all, limits our ability to enjoy food.
Exactly.
Right? And God is merciful. God did not, and this is very clear in the Quran, God did not want to burden us with all these kind of extra stuff. And all these extra considerations also makes food more expensive, for God's sake. Right?
Yes.
What are we going to do with that, right? If we are going to define halal as tayyib and tayyib as organic, and since organic meat is expensive, that's going to prevent our ability to consume meat, which is we consider to be, good in itself, right? I'm coming from a Turkish culture. There are very few vegetarians in my culture. How dare you prevent me from consuming meat, essentially?
Exactly.
So there are tensions out there, but tensions are not necessarily bad things. Tensions lead to conversations. Tensions lead to change and innovation and more deliberate and more sophisticated and more complex conversations, as long as we are willing to be part of those conversations, in conscience.
Well, having these kinds of discussions are so useful and important. And, knowing this history also, I think everybody who's a halal consumer needs to read this book to really understand that. And you mentioned a very important point that the tayyib was really considered as basically tasty, just that was it. And we have, I certainly, I believe, okay, halal and tayyib is tasty, but that's not the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of tayyib now, right? Because back then they didn't have all these added ingredients to food. They didn't have processes that we have today. So we have to look at that context. I mean, just from a food manufacturing point of view, no one would ever think that, sugar would have to be labeled halal because of the process of, the bones being used to bleach sugar. For example, if you're not in the food industry, why would you know that? Or if you're not a vegan, why would you know that, for example, right? I mean, those things didn't happen back then. So it makes total sense that the meaning would be sort of edited and maybe even, dare I say, watered down today.
Right.
Because of these kinds of things that go on in food manufacturing. And what a nightmare or a blessing it can be for people who are creating food products that have to put all these labels on their food to market it, halal, kosher, non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free. I mean, it's great because it speaks to the crowd, but I think my head is spinning just thinking about all the different labels that can go on to food today. Yeah. But that's where we are in the modern world. So so that part is just fascinating. And I really wish we could do an entire interview just about the medieval Islamic concept of halal, because you mentioned that the idea of food as how it relates to your body and health, that is resurging today. And and that's an exciting topic, and I love that topic because I think food as medicine or food and health, all of that goes together, and more people are being more conscious of these things today. So I think going along those lines of ethical halal, you're getting more into that like conscious consumerism that we're starting to see today, which is a great thing, that more people are questioning and asking suppliers, asking businesses, where's this coming from, and what are the animals being fed? I mean, we can get too nitty gritty sometimes, but the awareness is there, and that's a good thing. So, so have I missed anything that you would like to mention or talk about in your book that I failed to ask? Anything?
No, this was very comprehensive.
I know. I think you read the book really closely, actually.
Oh, well, I really need to. There's certain chapters I wasn't able to go into depth with just yet. So I'm going. This is a book that will be on my library, in my library forever. So I hope everybody else does the same. It's something to pass down to your kids and let them read it too, because especially kids in non-Muslim countries who are feeling like, this halal thing it feels a little foreign, it feels a little bit, well, you're different. And, that whole halal word can sometimes be, something that tends to divide people. But your book serves more than just giving us the history. It's something that, you can apply and educate others about, and, people can use this in schools and so on. So I think it's really important for the young generation to know this history as well. I certainly would feel comforted, in that way.
Thank you. It's very generous.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you're welcome. So we have some questions. Could we get into some audience questions? I'll go right to the beginning. So to be fair, let's see. Healthy food is important for our physical as well as mental growth. Yes. Okay. One person is asking, I worked in the halal food industry. Why did it seem that South Asians were far more particular to eating zabiha halal than Middle Eastern ethnicities? Did you ever come across that in your research?
We have, actually, and there are hypotheses. There has to be dedicated research on that. I was wondering, at least more recently, where, it's related to where these communities or populations receiving their food from, right? For example, in places like Turkey, Turkey is a meat producer, so we don't import, for the most part, food from Australia, for example.
Right.
I wonder if there's a variation in that regard across regions. There's a hypothesis out there. It hasn't been proven. I've seen it being mentioned. Depends on where you are getting meat from. So if you are getting your meat from abroad, you questions arise about how those
Right.
meat are being butchered.
Yeah, that makes
one
sense.
possible. I won't bet my house on it, but that's one possible explanation.
Yeah, it's a good question, and that is something that I've also thought about over the years as well. Because just going down in Devon in Chicago, where there's a lot of Indo-Pakistani grocers, the main advertisement is the Zabiha halal. There's always that Zabiha before the halal in terms to advertise the meat. But in mostly Middle Eastern markets, that isn't as common as a thing to pull people in. It's not. So it's an interesting question, but
one also wonders if, for example, this Muslims living in a minority in
yes.
in India, Indian subcontinent at least, that might have historical
Sure. Okay, they're asking if you knew or researched Abdulhamid Evans. Did you ever come across him? I don't know why. Who asked that question? He was one of the key pioneers coming out of the UK. So no.
We'll take note of his name.
I know. Yeah, sorry.
He has since passed away. But I first met him actually in Chicago, maybe 13 years ago. And his wife, Salama, she's still Salama Evans, I believe she's Canadian. She's very active in the halal education space still. Yeah. She does a lot of work promoting halal businesses and so on. So, okay, one question here is, I'm wondering if anyone found the perfect replacement for pancetta, or I have, or they're saying guan aisle for carbonara. Personally, I don't think it's possible till proven wrong. I've eaten the original carbonara before becoming Muslim, and I know the taste. It does work best with pork, unfortunately for us. I use turkey bacon.
What about pasterma?
In Turkey, yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, and you can get that. I mean, you're in California. You can get that in certain places, and I know in Los Angeles there's a lot of pasterma makers. Maybe also in San Francisco. But
yeah, sure. Nothing beats the ones in Turkey, though. They're so locally sourced and very delicious. Now you're making me miss the meat there. That was the nice part about living there, not having to really worry so much about meat being halal. But I did notice that in the poultry section I used to go to in the grocery store in the Migros, there was one brand that always had a halal and tayyib sticker. It had a tayyib sticker, and I was like, "Wow, that's interesting." I wonder.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That it's exported, maybe.
I don't know. I think it was from Turkey. I'm pretty sure.
No, it's a brand that's produced for export markets, but also.
Yeah, but it was in the Migros, though. It was in the Migros.
Yeah.
And it really was tasty. It was much tastier than the others, so I don't know.
I'm gonna look out for that.
Yeah, look at the chicken section, and I'll have to remember the name. But someone is asking, how do you feel about those halal wines and beer in the market? Did you come across that in your research?
Oh yeah, we did. Yeah, we wrote quite a bit about that in the book. I mean, I think it's an innovative and responsive development to a modern need, really.
We have a lecture on it.
Yeah, I think you attended a lecture about it where we talked too much detail maybe about it, but I think the idea that there's an allure of alcohol consumption in the modern world that perhaps became more commercialized in a way that we never saw in the early modern world, and so the halal response to that is I can also socialize with my friends and drink a beverage that's not Coca-Cola or soft drink or a traditional drink of the Middle East, like saleb or boza or something like that. And it mimics something like that, whatever they're drinking in non-halal circles, but it gives us the satisfaction of camaraderie, of of
Manliness.
socialization, sometimes manliness in certain contexts, and it satisfies a need. And I think the market has been responsive to it. I think increasingly they're actually producing products that are of higher quality, that are not just appealing to people who follow halal rules, but actually to non-Muslims who simply don't want to drink alcohol for a variety of reasons, health reasons, whatever other reasons they're choosing. And I think the market responded, and I think the products are getting better, and I think they're also becoming commercialized in a way that appeals to a broader sector. And I think that sector will just keep growing, in our opinion. But I don't know if you want to add.
No, you are the expert on the topic, so you wrote that part.
I did write that part.
Well, they wouldn't be created if there wasn't a need, right?
Yes.
So, and you mentioned on page 255, you say this growth of the modern halal market reveals an alignment and conversion of religious values with capitalist global economy. Sorry, and that's true. That's just true. Like we've never seen an explosion of products in the food and beverage industry in general, but that halal niche is exploding as well.
There's a demand for it, and
demand.
also the supply side. The producers also creating that demand as well, right? Generating a halal product that there wasn't initially demand for. Now the consumers are aware of that product.
Yeah.
They go after that, and that's a supply side stimulant in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
We have we in the Muslim community we're blessed with a lot of food scientists, and they are contributing to this possibility of creating products that, when people see something that's not halal and want to have it made halal, food scientists know how to kind of make that happen. And from when I started to now, the sheer amount of products that are on the market that are halal is just amazing. Things that you never thought would even be out there. But then there's also the things that people don't realize need to be, halal, like bottled water. People always ask me, like, why does it have to be halal? Well, that's also another discussion. But again, it goes back to the demand. So
I think, to the person who asked the question, one last point there, for the market's response and the plurality of products coming out to respond to it, there is also a criticism of products that are mimicking alcohol.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, sure.
There are people who think, you're trying. Yes, if it looks haram, then
sure.
It smells of haram, and it should be avoided. And there is that discussion.
There is that discussion. Yeah, there is always that discussion versus the sort of business aspect of it, right? The demand. And you answered that in saying, this is a response to the modern demand for it. So they wouldn't be producing it if people weren't buying it. That's the end of the day. So someone asked, what is Pasterma? How would you describe Pasterma?
Pasterma it comes from a Turkish root of a word Pasterma, to press down, and it comes from the technique of pressing down. It's cured beef, really, and it's a cousin of pastrami. If your person's asking is familiar with pastrami, but it's pressed beef that is cured with salt and a tantalizing array of spices, including garlic, fenugreek, paprika, salt, pepper, and all kinds of. Everybody has a proprietary blend of how they make it, and it's left to dry and cure for a while, depending on who's making it. It's popularly made not just in Turkey. Honestly, it's an Eastern Mediterranean specialty, and possibly of Armenian roots.
Interesting.
And although we might get in trouble for saying it's contested, right? Everybody, culinary food,
nationalism.
Culinary nationalism. Everybody claims that it's their own.
Sure.
But everybody has, we make versions in Egypt, and the Lebanese have it, and I think they make it in Cyprus, Turkey, Armenia, the Caucasus. So it's pretty popular in those areas.
Oh, Eddie, you asked the right person. That was a fantastic answer. I mean, I'm glad you answered that, because I've had it here, I've had it in Turkey, but I've seen it. It's served at breakfast sometimes, like with eggs. Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, delicious. Yeah. Okay, so one last question is, yet some certification agencies refuse to consider non-alcoholic beverages halal just based on using the word beer or wine. Do they see
Yes.
this changing? So do you see this changing at all?
I'm not sure if it's changing. The divisions are very much there, and those divisions are here to stay. I think. I don't know if there's a trend either way.
Yeah, I mean, some of the popular drinks in the Middle East, like barbican or musi, they're called malt drinks.
Malt drinks.
Yeah, they're malt, and actually in Turkey there's one called maltana, and they sometimes they're either plain, so they taste maybe a little bit like non-alcoholic beer, or they have fruit flavors like cherry flavor or apple flavor, and they're sweetened, so more like a soft drink. So, those seem to be acceptable, even though the marketing and the bottles and the look of them is, has shades of how alcohol sometimes is marketed in the West. But yeah, for now, I do think something called non-alcohol, wine, if it has the word wine in it, perhaps may not, be as Yeah.
And it's interesting how the responses are to these kinds of products in Muslim countries versus, in the Muslim communities abroad. It's interesting. So there are sometimes different responses in different places as well.
Yeah, our experience is oftentimes, the diaspora community is so keen on identity preservation and tradition preservation that the interpretations can be tending on the more stricter side versus actually in the Islamic world where,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's such articulate responses. I mean, this was a fascinating conversation, and I feel so blessed that you came to talk to us today, and I know people are saying the same thing. So we don't want to take up more of your time. I think we had lots of questions and everything got answered. And if there's anything else you want to close with, please go ahead.
It's very nice of you to have us on your program. It's thanks for your very careful, very nuanced reading of the book, and we appreciate all the comments and the questions, and it has been a pleasure for us.
Yeah, we're just delighted to talk with you and with your audience, and look forward to really being in touch.
Thank you so much. I hope we can meet in person when this pandemic is over and you're back in Vermont, perhaps. And this has been my honor. Ever since the book came out, and I just respect everything you've done here. And like I said, it's a treasure for me, and I hope everyone else gets it and does the same. So thank you so much for all of your hard work and for joining us here today. And let's be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, stay healthy. Assalamu alaikum. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.